The train screeched into Florence, Arizona territory, belching steam and cinders across the platform where Theresa Jenkins stood trembling with exhaustion, her arms wrapped tightly around a wailing infant that everyone aboard had tried to ignore for the past 3 days. She had boarded in St. Louis with hope burning in her chest and a promise that had turned to ash before the train even crossed into Kansas. And now she stood in this dusty, unforgiving town with nothing but the clothes on her back, $7 in her pocket, and a baby girl who belonged to no one except perhaps God, if he was paying attention at all. The other passengers pushed past her with their eyes averted, the same way they had avoided looking at her since Cincinnati when the baby's mother had simply stopped breathing in the night, her fever finally claiming her after days of struggle. Theresa had been sitting across from the young woman, had listened to her desperate story about traveling west to join a man who had promised marriage, had watched the light fade from her eyes as she begged Theresa to take the child somewhere safe. The conductor had wanted to leave the baby at the next station, to hand her over to whatever authorities existed in those small prairie towns, but Theresa had refused. She had made a promise to a dying woman, even if that promise had no clear ending, no destination beyond west, just west, away from everything that had gone wrong. The platform cleared quickly, leaving Theresa standing alone in the harsh afternoon sun of September 1882. Florence was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts that seemed to shimmer in the heat. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing, and the air carried the scent of creosote and dust. The baby, who Theresa had been calling Emma because she needed something to call her, continued crying, her small face red and scrunched with discomfort. "You planning on standing there until sundown, or you got somewhere to be?" The voice came from behind her, deep and rough around the edges but not unkind. Theresa turned to find a man watching her from the shade of the station overhang. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were an unusual shade of green like bottled glass held up to light. He wore dusty work clothes, a worn leather vest over a dark shirt, and boots that had seen considerable use. A hat dangled from his hand, and she noticed his knuckles were scraped, as if he had recently been in a fight or working with something unforgiving. "I have somewhere to be," Theresa lied, lifting her chin. "I am simply getting my bearings." The man stepped into the sunlight, and she could see him more clearly now. His face was sun-darkened and angular, with a jaw that suggested stubbornness, and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though it was not smiling now. He was studying her with an expression she could not quite read, taking in her travel-stained dress, the baby in her arms, the single worn carpetbag at her feet. "That baby yours?" he asked. "Yes," Theresa said automatically then. "No, that is, I am caring for her. She's sick. She sounds poorly. She is hungry and tired, as am I. We have been traveling for days." Theresa felt tears prick at her eyes and force them back. She would not cry in front of this stranger, would not show weakness in a town where she knew no one and had nothing. The man moved closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "What are you doing in Florence? You got family here." "I am looking for work," Theresa said, which was true enough. She needed employment, needed a way to keep herself and Emma fed and sheltered. Beyond that, she had not thought much further. The journey had consumed all her energy, all her ability to plan. Work doing what? Most respectable work for women in Florence is already spoken for, and the not respectable kind, well, you do not look the type. He said it matter-of-factly without judgment, and Theresa felt her cheeks warm. "I can cook, clean, so. I can read and write and do figures. I worked in a boarding house in Ohio before I came west. Why did you come west? It was a simple question, but it opened up a chasm of memory that Theresa did not want to fall into. Her aunt's house in Columbus, the man her aunt had wanted her to marry, the suffocating sense that her life was being decided by others. The young woman on the train had seemed like a sign, a purpose, a reason to keep moving when everything else had fallen apart. I needed a change, she said finally. The man nodded slowly as if this explained everything. My name is Zachary Nelson. I run a ranch about 5 miles north of town. Been coming into Florence for supplies when I heard the train coming in. Was going to head back, but then I saw you standing here looking lost, and I figured I would wait and see if you needed direction. Why would you do that? Zachary shrugged. My mother raised me to help people when I could. She died 3 years back, but I figure her lessons still hold. Emma's crying had subsided into whimpering, and Theresa shifted her weight, trying to ease the ache in her arms. The baby was small, probably only a few months old, but after days of holding her, Theresa felt as if her shoulders might never recover. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Nelson, but I will manage. Will you? He looked pointedly at the empty platform, the quiet street beyond. Florence is not a big town, Miss Jenkins. Theresa Jenkins. Miss Jenkins. Florence is not a big town, and it is not particularly welcoming to strangers without means. The boarding house is full up with minors, and Mrs. Patterson, who runs it, does not take to children. The hotel is expensive and run by a man who will expect payment up front. You said you have $7. Theresa stared at him. How did you know that? I did not. But you got that look about you, the look of someone counting every penny and coming up short. I have been there myself. Zachary put his hat on, adjusting it against the sun. Here is what I am going to do. I am going to offer you a job at my ranch. I need someone who can cook and keep house. My foreman, old Carlos, has been doing his best, but the man burns water and thinks dust is just part of the decoration. You would have your own room, meals, and wages. $30 a month to start. I have a baby. I can see that, she cries. She needs attention. I could not possibly work effectively while caring for her. Zachary looked at Emma, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. We will figure it out. Ranch life is hard, but it is not impossible. Carlos's daughter Maria comes by sometimes to help with the washing. She has kids of her own and knows about babies. Between all of us, we will manage. You do not even know me. How do you know I am not a thief or worse? Are you? No. Then I reckon we will get along fine. Zachary picked up her carpet bag before she could protest. My wagon is just over at the livery. Come on. You look like you are about to fall over and that baby needs tending. Theresa wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could manage on her own, but the truth was she could not. She had no other options, no other plans. This stranger was offering her exactly what she needed, and while every instinct told her to be cautious, to question his motives, she was too tired and too desperate to refuse. Why are you doing this? She asked as she followed him down the platform. Zachary glanced back at her, and for the first time she saw him almost smile. Somebody helped me once when I needed it. Figure it is my turn to return the favor. Besides, that baby did not ask to be in this situation, and neither did you from the looks of it. Seems to me you both deserve a chance. They walked through Florence's main street, and Theresa took in the details of what might become her new home. There was a general store with a faded sign, a saloon with swinging doors and the sound of piano music drifting out, a sheriff's office with bars on the windows, and a church with a white steeple that looked almost defiant against the harsh landscape. People stared as they passed, curious about the stranger with the baby following Zachary Nelson, but no one stopped them or spoke. The livery was at the end of the street, a large barn structure that smelled of horses and hay. Zachary's wagon stood ready, hitched to two sturdy horses that nickered softly as he approached. He loaded her carpet bag into the back, then turned to help her up onto the seat. His hand was calloused and warm, and Theresa felt a strange flutter in her chest that she immediately dismissed as exhaustion. The ride to the ranch took them north through terrain that was both beautiful and forbidding. The desert stretched out in shades of gold and rust, dotted with saguaro cacti that stood like sentinels and scrub brush that seemed determined to survive despite all odds. The mountains loomed closer, and Theresa could see the late afternoon light painting them in shades of lavender and rose. Emma had fallen asleep against her shoulder, finally worn out from crying, and the rhythm of the wagon provided a strange sort of peace. "How long have you had the ranch?" Theresa asked, breaking the silence. "My father bought the land 15 years ago, back in '67. He wanted to raise cattle, thought he could make something out here. He died 5 years back, left it to me. I was 18, did not know much about running a ranch, but I learned. Carlos had worked for my father and stayed on to help me. We have got about 200 head of cattle now, some horses, chickens. It is not a big operation, but it is ours. It must be hard work. It is. But it is honest work, and I like being my own man. Out here, you succeed or fail based on what you do, not on who your family knows or how much money you started with." He guided the horses around a wash, careful of the uneven ground. "What about you? You said you worked in a boarding house. My parents died when I was 16. Yellow fever. I went to live with my aunt in Columbus, but she had her own ideas about what my life should look like. When I turned 21 last year, I decided I wanted something different. I took a position at a boarding house, saved what I could. I was planning to come west anyway, maybe California, find work in one of the cities there. Then I met Sarah on the train. Sarah, the baby's mother. She was so young, barely 19. She had been working in a factory in Pennsylvania, fell in love with a man who promised to send for her. He wrote letters for months, telling her about his ranch in New Mexico, how they would marry as soon as she arrived. She saved everything she had and bought a train ticket west. But when she got to his town, she found out he had married someone else 3 months earlier. Someone with money and family connections. Theresa felt anger rise in her chest at the memory. She was already pregnant, already showing. She had nowhere to go, no money to get home, even if she wanted to face the shame of it. She got on the train heading west, said she would find somewhere to start over. Then she got sick, and she asked you to take the baby. She begged me. She knew she was dying, could feel it. She said she could not let Emma go to an orphanage, could not let her grow up without someone who cared. I did not plan on keeping her. I thought I would find someone, a good family, someone who could give her a real home. But then I thought, what if I could not? What if I handed her over to people who would mistreat her or use her for labor as soon as she was old enough? At least if she stayed with me, I would know she was safe." Zachary was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the road ahead. "That was a brave thing you did. Not many people would take on that kind of responsibility for a stranger." "I do not feel brave. I feel terrified." "That is usually when bravery happens. When you are scared, but you do it anyway." They crested a rise, and Theresa saw the ranch spread out below them. It was more substantial than she had expected. A main house built of adobe and wood with a wide porch wrapped around the front. Several outbuildings, including a barn and what looked like a bunkhouse, and corrals where horses moved lazily in the cooling evening air. The setting sun cast everything in gold, and for the first time since leaving Ohio, Theresa felt something like hope. The wagon rolled into the yard, and a man emerged from the barn. He was older, probably in his 60s, with silver-shot hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades under the desert sun. He walked with a slight limp but moved with purpose, his eyes shrewd as he took in Theresa and the baby. "Boss, you bring home more than supplies." He called out in accented English. "Carlos, this is Miss Theresa Jenkins. She is going to be helping us with the house and cooking. Miss Jenkins, this is Carlos Ruiz, my foreman and the man who has kept this ranch running despite my best efforts to run it into the ground." Carlos laughed, a deep sound that seemed to come from his belly. "You do fine, Zachary. You just need help with the things that are not cattle and horses." He moved closer to the wagon, his expression softening as he saw Emma. "And who is this little one?" "Her name is Emma. Her mother passed away during our journey. I am caring for her now." "A baby on a ranch," Carlos said thoughtfully. "Been a long time since we had one of those around here. My Maria will be happy. She has been saying this place needs life, not just two old men and cows." Zachary helped Theresa down from the wagon, and she stood in the yard feeling suddenly overwhelmed. Everything was happening so fast. This morning, she had been on the train with no plan and no prospects, and now she was standing in front of a ranch house being offered work and shelter by people who did not know her at all. "Come on," Zachary said gently, picking up her carpet bag again. "Let me show you the house, get you settled. You both need food and rest." The interior of the house was dim and cool after the heat outside. The main room served as a kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy table surrounded by mismatched chairs in the center. The kitchen area had a cast iron stove, shelves lined with dishes and supplies, and a pump sink that looked relatively new. Everything was dusty and slightly disorganized, but it was clean enough and seemed well built. "There are 3 bedrooms," Zachary explained, leading her down a short hallway. "This one was my parents' room. I use it now. This one here is empty, has been since my sister got married and moved to Tucson 4 years ago. That is yours if you want it. The 3rd room is smaller, mostly storage, but I can clear it out if you need more space for the baby." The room he indicated was modest but comfortable, with an iron bedstead covered in a faded quilt, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and a window that looked out over the corrals. The walls were whitewashed adobe, and the floor was packed earth covered with worn rugs. It was simple, but after nights on the train, it looked like paradise. "This is perfect," Theresa said quietly. "Thank you. I will let you get settled. There is a pitcher and basin on the dresser for washing. The necessary is out back past the kitchen. I will put together something for supper, though I warn you, my cooking is not going to impress anyone." After he left, Theresa sat on the bed with Emma in her arms and let herself feel the full weight of exhaustion. The baby stirred, whimpering, and Theresa realized she needed to be fed and changed. She had supplies in her carpet bag, the few things she had managed to buy at a stop in New Mexico, but they were running low. She would need to ask Zachary about getting milk and proper diapers. She changed Emma's diaper, cleaned her as best she could with water from the pitcher, and then carried her to the kitchen. Zachary was at the stove, attempting to do something with beans and salt pork. He looked up when she entered, and she saw a flash of something in his eyes, something that made her stomach flutter again. "She needs milk," Theresa said. "Do you have any? We have got a cow, but she is mostly for butter and cheese. I will milk her tonight, get you some fresh. In the meantime, there is canned milk in the pantry, left side, top shelf. Not as good as fresh, but it will do." Theresa found the can and mixed it with a little water, then sat at the table to feed Emma with a small bottle and rubber nipple she had purchased in Albuquerque. The baby drank greedily, her small hands waving, and Theresa felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her. This child had been through so much already, had lost her mother before she even understood what that meant. Theresa would do everything in her power to make sure Emma had a good life, a safe life. She is taking to it well, Zachary observed, bringing plates to the table. She is resilient. Babies are, I suppose, they have to be. They ate in companionable silence, the food simple but filling. Theresa had not realized how hungry she was until she started eating, and she cleaned her plate quickly. Zachary seemed pleased, though he said nothing. When they finished, he helped her clean up, showing her where things were kept, explaining the routine of the household. "Carlos and I usually wake around 5, he said. "We have coffee and something quick, then head out to check the herd and do whatever needs doing. You do not need to wake that early, but if you could have a proper breakfast ready by 7 and dinner around 6, that would be helpful. We take lunch out on the range, usually just bread and cheese, things that keep. Laundry is once a week, Mondays. Maria comes Tuesday mornings to help with heavy cleaning. Any questions? Where do you get supplies? If I am going to cook properly, I need to know what is available. We go into Florence once a week, sometimes more if needed. There is a good general store that stocks most everything. If they do not have it, they can order it from Phoenix or Tucson. We also trade with some of the local ranchers, eggs for beef, that kind of thing. You make a list of what you need and we will get it. And you are certain about this arrangement, about me staying here with Emma?" Zachary met her eyes directly, and she was struck again by how green his were, how steady his gaze. "I am certain. Look, I know this is unusual, you coming here like this, me offering work to a stranger. But out here we do things differently. We help each other because we have to. And something about you, about this whole situation, it feels right. I cannot explain it better than that. I will work hard. I promise you that. I will earn my keep. I believe you will." That night, Theresa lay in the unfamiliar bed with Emma sleeping in a dresser drawer padded with blankets, and she listened to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. Somewhere an owl called and the horses moved in the corrals, their hooves soft on the ground. She thought about Sarah, about the promise she had made, about the strange turn her life had taken. She thought about Zachary Nelson, about the kindness in his eyes, and the way he had simply decided to help her without asking for anything in return. It was the kind of thing she had stopped believing people did, the kind of goodness that seemed like a story rather than reality. She fell asleep thinking that maybe, just maybe, she and Emma had found somewhere they could belong. The next days fell into a rhythm that Theresa found both comforting and challenging. She woke each morning to the sound of Zachary and Carlos moving around the house, the low rumble of their voices and the smell of coffee. By the time she emerged from her room with Emma, they were usually heading out, Zachary offering a quiet morning and a nod before disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. She threw herself into work, determined to prove her worth. The house needed attention after months of being tended by men who cared more about function than comfort. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, organized the pantry, and attacked the accumulated dust with fierce determination. She cooked meals that were simple but flavorful, using what supplies were available and making mental notes of what else she could prepare if she had different ingredients. Emma proved to be less of a challenge than Theresa had feared. The baby seemed to sense the stability of their new situation, and settled into a routine of eating, sleeping, and brief periods of content wakefulness. When Maria arrived on Tuesday morning, she was delighted to discover a baby in the house and immediately offered to watch Emma while Theresa worked. Maria was in her 40s, round and cheerful with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that crinkled when she smiled. She spoke a mixture of Spanish and English, her accent thick but her meaning always clear. She had 5 children of her own, the youngest 7 and the oldest 23, and she approached Emma with the confidence of someone who had seen and handled every possible baby crisis. "She is beautiful," Maria said, holding Emma up and examining her with expert eyes. "Healthy too, gracias a Dios. You are taking good care of her." "I am trying. I have never cared for a baby before. I am learning as I go." That is how all mothers learn. You think any of us know what we are doing the first time. We pretend and the baby survives and somehow it all works out. Maria laughed, a warm sound that filled the kitchen. "You are staying then? Zachary said you are the new housekeeper." "Yes, if it works out. I am still on trial, I suppose." "Zachary is a good man. He will not turn you out, especially not with a baby. He has a soft heart, though he tries to hide it sometimes." Maria settled into a chair with Emma on her lap, bouncing her gently. "It is good to have a woman here again. This place has been too much man for too long. It needs softness, needs life." Over the following weeks, Theresa learned the rhythms of ranch life. She learned that Zachary was up before dawn every day without fail, that he worked with a quiet intensity that spoke of deep commitment to the land and animals under his care. She learned that Carlos was the real expert, the one who knew when a storm was coming by the way the cattle moved, who could doctor a sick horse with herbs and patience. She learned that ranch work was endless, that there was always something needing attention, always another task waiting. She also learned things about Zachary himself, small details that accumulated into a picture of who he was. He read in the evenings, books about animal husbandry and land management, but also novels and poetry that seemed at odds with his rough cowboy exterior. He was patient with the animals, gentle in a way that surprised her. He never raised his voice, even when frustrated, and he treated Carlos with respect that bordered on reverence. One evening about 3 weeks after her arrival, Theresa was cleaning up after supper when Zachary appeared in the doorway, holding a wooden cradle. "Made this for Emma," he said, almost shyly. "Figured she was getting too big for that drawer, and a cradle would be easier for you. I am not much of a carpenter, but it is sturdy enough." Theresa stared at the cradle, at the careful joints and smooth wood, at the rockers that would let her soothe Emma to sleep. "You made this, in the evenings, in the barn. Did not want to disturb you with the hammering and such." He set it down, running a hand over the wood. "My father made one for me when I was born and another for my sister. Figured it was a good tradition to continue." "It is beautiful," Theresa said, and her voice came out choked. "Thank you, this is so kind. She deserves something nice." "Every baby does." Zachary looked at Emma, who was lying on a blanket on the floor, waving her arms at nothing in particular. "She is doing well, I think, growing. She is. Thanks to you and Carlos and Maria, thanks to all of this. I do not know what would have happened to us if we had not met you at that train station. You would have figured something out. You are resourceful. Maybe. But I am grateful I did not have to find out." Their eyes met, and Theresa felt that flutter again, stronger this time. Over the past weeks, she had noticed more things about Zachary, details that had nothing to do with his kindness or work ethic. The way his hair curled at his neck when it got too long. The way his hands moved with easy confidence whether he was handling a horse or pouring coffee. The way he smiled, rare but genuine, like sunlight breaking through clouds. She had tried not to notice these things, had told herself that she was here to work, that she had Emma to think about, that she could not afford to develop feelings for her employer. But feelings, she was discovering, did not care much about practicality or propriety. October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints that the desert could be something other than relentlessly hot. The mornings had a crispness to them, and the evenings were pleasant enough to sit on the porch after dinner. Theresa found herself doing this more often, with Emma in her arms and Zachary nearby, the two of them talking about small things while the sun set in spectacular displays of orange and pink. "Tell me about your sister," Theresa said one evening. "You mentioned she moved to Tucson, Lucy. She is 2 years younger than me, and she always hated ranch life. Too dirty, too isolated. She wanted city life, wanted parties and pretty dresses and things our mother never had much interest in. When she turned 18, she met a banker from Tucson at a dance in Florence. He courted her properly, asked our father's permission, the whole traditional process. They married 6 months later and she left without looking back. You see her often, once a year maybe. She comes at Christmas sometimes, though her husband does not care for the ranch, says it is primitive." Zachary's tone suggested what he thought of that opinion. "She is happy though, I think. She has what she wanted, 3 children and a nice house in town. It is just not the life I would choose." "What life would you choose?" "This one," he said simply. "I know it is hard work, that most people would think I am crazy for wanting to break my back every day raising cattle in the middle of the desert, but I love it. I love waking up and knowing that what I do matters, that the ranch survives or fails based on my decisions. I love being outside, working with the animals, watching the seasons change. Out here, life makes sense in a way it never did anywhere else." "I think I understand that," Theresa said. "When I was living in Columbus, everything felt predetermined. My aunt had my whole life planned out and none of it was what I wanted. Coming west, even under the circumstances, it feels like I am finally making my own choices. Are you happy here?" Zachary asked, and there was something in his voice that made Theresa look at him more closely. "I am. Happier than I have been in a long time. This place, it feels like home somehow. Good, I am glad." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Emma had fallen asleep against Theresa's shoulder, her small body warm and solid. Theresa thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks, how this place and these people had become important to her in ways she had not anticipated. "Theresa," Zachary said, his voice quiet in the gathering dark, "I want you to know that you are not on trial anymore. You do not have to prove anything. You and Emma, you are part of this ranch now. This is your home for as long as you want it to be." "Thank you," Theresa whispered. "That means everything." The weeks turned into months, and Theresa found herself settling into life at the ranch with increasing ease. Emma grew, reaching the milestones that Maria assured her were normal and healthy. She began smiling, real smiles that lit up her small face, and then laughing, a sound that filled the house with unexpected joy. Zachary was particularly good at making Emma laugh, making ridiculous faces and silly noises that had the baby dissolving into giggles. Theresa watched these interactions with a warmth in her chest that she finally admitted to herself was more than simple appreciation. She was falling in love with Zachary Nelson, with his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness, with the way he treated Emma as if she were precious, with the way he looked at Theresa sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention. She did not know if he felt the same way. He was unfailingly kind to her, but he was kind to everyone. He respected her space, never pushing or presuming, and while she appreciated that respect, part of her wished he would give some sign that his feelings matched hers. In early December, a cold snap hit the area, bringing temperatures that felt shocking after months of heat. Theresa bundled Emma in every blanket she could find and kept a fire going constantly in the main room. On the third night of the cold spell, she woke to the sound of Emma crying and discovered the fire had died down to embers. The room was freezing, her breath visible in the moonlight coming through the window. She wrapped Emma in a blanket and carried her to the main room, intending to rebuild the fire. But when she arrived, she found Zachary already there, kneeling in front of the fireplace and coaxing flames from fresh wood. "Sorry if I woke you," he said without turning around. "I heard the wind and figured the fire might need attention. Emma is cold. I did not realize how much the temperature would drop. Bring her here, close to the fire." Zachary stood and moved to the couch, gesturing for Theresa to sit. "It will warm up soon." Theresa sat, holding Emma close and feeling the warmth from the growing fire begin to reach them. Zachary disappeared into his room and returned with an armful of blankets, which he draped around her and the baby with careful attention. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body, and they watched the fire together. Emma quieted, soothed by the warmth and the security of being held. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, but inside they were safe and warm. "Zachary," Theresa said softly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really help me that day at the station? The truth." He was quiet for a long moment, his face thoughtful in the firelight. "The truth is, when I saw you standing there with that baby, looking lost and scared but also determined, something in my chest just knew that you were important, that if I let you walk away, I would regret it for the rest of my life. I did not understand it then, and I am not sure I fully understand it now, but I have learned to trust those instincts. Out here, they are what keep you alive sometimes. And now, do you regret it? Not for a single second." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were intense in the firelight. "Theresa, you have brought life back to this house, to this ranch. You have brought Emma, and she is like sunshine. But more than that, you have brought yourself, and I find myself thinking about you constantly, about your smile and your laugh and the way you hum while you work. About how good you are with Emma, how patient and loving, about how brave you are, taking on all of this without hesitation." Theresa's heart was racing. "Zachary, I know I am your employer, and I know that makes this complicated. I know you have Emma to think about and your own life to build. But I need you to know that my feelings for you have gone beyond respect or appreciation. I care about you, Theresa, deeply." "I care about you too," Theresa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been trying to be practical, but I cannot seem to help it. You have been so good to us, so kind, and you are everything I did not know I was looking for." Zachary reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek with his hand. His palm was rough from work but gentle, and Theresa leaned into the touch without thinking. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes." The kiss was soft and careful, a question as much as a statement. Theresa felt warmth flood through her that had nothing to do with the fire, and when they pulled apart, she was smiling. "That was nice," she said. "It was." Zachary smiled too, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. "Can I do it again, please?" They sat by the fire for hours, talking and kissing and making quiet plans, Emma sleeping peacefully between them. When the sun finally rose, painting the desert in shades of gold, they were still there, and Theresa felt as if her whole life had shifted into focus. The months that followed were among the happiest of Theresa's life. She and Zachary courted properly, with all the traditional steps, even though they lived in the same house. He brought her flowers from the desert, small blooms that survived against all odds. They took walks in the evenings, with Emma bundled against the cooling air. They talked about everything, their pasts and hopes and dreams for the future. In February, Zachary rode into Florence and returned with a ring, simple gold, that had belonged to his mother. He proposed on the front porch at sunset, with Emma gurgling happily in Theresa's arms, and Theresa said yes without hesitation. They married in March, a small ceremony in Florence's church with Carlos and Maria and a handful of neighbors in attendance. Emma, now almost a year old and starting to pull herself up on furniture, wore a white dress that Maria had sewn, and she charmed everyone by clapping her hands during the vows. Theresa wore a simple cream-colored dress that she had made herself, with lace borrowed from Maria and flowers in her hair that Zachary had picked that morning. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, and Zachary kissed her in front of everyone, Theresa felt as if her heart might burst from happiness. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food that everyone had contributed. There was music and dancing, and at one point Carlos stood and offered a toast in Spanish that had everyone laughing and wiping away tears. Maria cornered Theresa in the kitchen and hugged her fiercely, whispering that she was family now, truly family. That night, after everyone had left and Emma was asleep in her cradle, Theresa stood in the bedroom that was now officially hers and Zachary's, and felt a sense of peace she had never experienced before. She had come west with nothing, fleeing a life that felt like slow suffocation, and she had found everything she never knew she needed. Zachary came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy, Mrs. Nelson." "Happier than I knew it was possible to be." "Good. Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." Life on the ranch continued, but with a new dimension of joy and partnership. Theresa and Zachary worked together to improve the house, to expand the herd, to build something that would last. Emma grew, reaching each new milestone with enthusiasm, and when she took her first steps on a warm day in May, both Theresa and Zachary cried with pride. In June, Theresa discovered she was pregnant. She told Zachary over breakfast, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through a series of expressions, shock, wonder, joy, before he swept her up in his arms and spun her around the kitchen. "Careful," she laughed. "You will make me sick." Sorry." He set her down gently, his hands on her shoulders. "A baby, we are having a baby. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. "Theresa, this is everything. You and Emma and now this baby, this is more than I ever thought I would have. You have given me a family." "We have given each other a family," Theresa corrected. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the Arizona summer heat made the later months challenging. Maria came more frequently, helping with Emma and with the heavier housework that Theresa could no longer manage easily. Zachary became almost comically protective, insisting she rest constantly and worrying over every twinge or discomfort. In February of 1884, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the morning, Theresa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James, after Zachary's father, and when Zachary held his son for the first time, Theresa saw tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Zachary whispered. "He is absolutely perfect." Emma, now almost 2 years old, was fascinated by her baby brother. She wanted to help with everything, bringing diapers and blankets and patting James's head with gentle hands. Theresa watched her daughter, for Emma was truly her daughter now regardless of blood, and felt grateful all over again for the promise she had made on a train platform in another life. The years unfolded with the kind of steady happiness that comes from hard work and deep love. The ranch prospered under Zachary's careful management and Theresa's organizational skills. They added a bull to improve the herd, built a larger barn, and hired 2 young cowboys to help with the expanding operation. Emma grew into a bright, curious child who loved the animals and the wide, open spaces of the desert. She had her mother Sarah's dark hair but Theresa's determined spirit, and everyone who met her remarked on her sunny disposition. She called Theresa Mama and Zachary Papa, and if anyone in Florence knew the circumstances of her arrival, they had the grace never to mention it. James was quieter than his sister, thoughtful and observant even as a baby. He had Zachary's green eyes and his careful way of studying things before acting. As he grew, it became clear he had inherited his father's affinity for animals, showing a natural talent for working with horses that had Zachary beaming with pride. In 1886, Theresa gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Rose. She arrived during a spring rainstorm, which Maria declared was a blessing, a sign of abundance and growth. Rose was a happy baby, quick to laugh and slow to fuss, and she completed their family in a way that felt exactly right. Life was not always easy. There were years when the drought was severe and the cattle suffered. There were illnesses and injuries, the ordinary crises of ranch life. Carlos's health began to decline, his limp becoming more pronounced, and eventually he moved to town to live with Maria and her family, though he still visited the ranch regularly to offer advice and share stories. But through it all, Theresa and Zachary faced each challenge together. They had built something strong, something that could weather storms both literal and figurative. They had created a family bound not just by blood but by choice and love, and they had made a home in the desert that felt like an anchor in an uncertain world. On a warm evening in September of 1892, exactly 10 years after Theresa had arrived in Florence clutching a baby nobody wanted, she sat on the front porch watching the sunset with Zachary beside her. Emma, now almost 11, was in the corral teaching James and Rose how to braid a horse's mane. Their laughter drifted across the yard, mixing with the sounds of evening birds and the distant lowing of cattle. "You ever think about that day at the train station?" Zachary asked, his hand finding hers. "All the time. It feels like a lifetime ago and like yesterday all at once. I knew the moment I saw you that my life was about to change. I did not know how, but I knew. You said they were both yours. Do you remember? When we were leaving Florence that day, someone made a comment about the baby and me, about how we were not your responsibility. And you said they are both mine now. I remember. It was true then, and it is true now. We were strangers. We were strangers who were meant to find each other. I believe that." Theresa leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their children play in the fading light. She thought about Sarah, about the promise that had brought her here, and hoped somehow her friend knew that Emma was loved and safe and happy. She thought about the girl she had been in Ohio, desperate and directionless, and marveled at the woman she had become. "I love you," she said quietly. "I love you too. Always." The sunset painted the desert in shades of amber and rose, and from inside the house came the smell of the stew Theresa had prepared for dinner. Soon they would call the children in, would gather around the table that Zachary's father had built decades ago, would share a meal and talk about their days. Later, after the children were in bed, she and Zachary would sit together in the quiet of their room and simply be, finding peace in each other's presence the way they had for 10 years. The desert night settled around the ranch, bringing its particular magic, the vast sky full of stars and the air cooling to comfortable temperatures. Somewhere a coyote howled and the horses stirred in response. The windmill creaked rhythmically, pumping water for tomorrow's needs. Life continued, steady and sure, built on a foundation of love and commitment, and a choice made on a train platform one hot September day. Theresa had arrived in Florence clutching a baby nobody wanted, desperate and alone. Zachary had looked at them both and seen something worth protecting, worth cherishing. He had claimed them with simple words and followed through with a lifetime of devotion. And in doing so, he had given Theresa everything she had ever needed: a home, a family, a love that would endure. The story that had begun with such uncertainty had found its ending in joy, in three children who would never know anything but security and love, in a partnership that grew stronger with each passing year. The ranch would continue, passing from generation to generation, but it would always be rooted in that moment when a cowboy looked at a woman and baby and said without hesitation that they belonged to him, that he would protect them and care for them no matter what. And he had. Through drought and prosperity, through hard times and good, through every single day that followed, Zachary Nelson had kept the promise he made before he even knew he was making it. They were his, and he was theirs, and that was all that mattered in the end. The years continued to flow like the seasons in the Arizona desert, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Emma grew into a young woman of remarkable capability, comfortable on horseback and equally at ease in the kitchen. She had inherited Theresa's practicality and Zachary's quiet confidence, and by the time she was 16, suitors from neighboring ranches were already making their interest known. Zachary pretended to be stern about it, cleaning his rifle ostentatiously whenever young men came calling, but Theresa could see the pride in his eyes when he looked at their eldest daughter. James, at 12, was already showing signs of the man he would become. He had Zachary's height and build, though he was still growing into his frame, and he possessed an almost uncanny ability with horses. He could calm the most fractious animal with patience and gentle words, and neighboring ranchers had begun asking if he could help train their more difficult stock. Zachary taught him everything he knew about ranch management, and it was clear that James would one day take over the operation. Rose, at 6, was the baby of the family and took full advantage of that position. She was spirited and fearless, forever climbing trees or chasing chickens or getting into mischief that left Theresa exasperated and amused in equal measure. She had Theresa's dark hair and Zachary's green eyes, a combination that would undoubtedly cause them considerable worry in another decade. The ranch had grown substantially over the years. Where they once had 200 head of cattle, they now ran nearly 600, and they had expanded their land holdings by purchasing adjacent parcels from neighbors who were retiring or moving on. They employed 4 full-time cowboys and seasonal help during Roundup, and the operation was one of the most successful in the Florence area. But success had not changed the essential nature of their family life. Dinner was still a time for gathering around the table and sharing the day's events. Sundays still meant church in Florence, followed by a leisurely meal and time spent together. Evenings still found Theresa and Zachary on the front porch, talking through problems and planning for the future. One particularly significant evening came in the spring of 1895, when Emma announced at dinner that she had something to tell them. She was 19 now, poised and beautiful, and the look on her face told Theresa immediately what was coming. "Daniel Porter has asked permission to court me formally," Emma said, her voice steady despite the faint color in her cheeks. "He spoke to Papa this afternoon at the fence line." Daniel was the son of their neighbor to the east, a young man of 22 who had taken over his family's ranch after his father's death the previous year. He was hardworking and respectful, and Theresa had seen the way he looked at Emma, with a mixture of admiration and awe that reminded her of how Zachary used to look at her in the early days. "And what did Papa say?" James asked, grinning. "I told him I would discuss it with the family," Zachary said, his tone neutral but his eyes twinkling. "Since this affects all of us." "Do you like him, Emma?" Theresa asked gently. "I do. Very much. He is kind and honest, and he treats me like I have thoughts worth hearing. He does not try to tell me what to do or think I am silly because I am a woman." Emma looked at her parents earnestly. I know I am young still, and we would have a long courtship before anything was decided, but I would like the chance to know him better, to see if this could be something real." Theresa and Zachary exchanged a look, one of those wordless conversations that happened between people who had been together for years. In Emma's careful words and steady gaze, Theresa saw herself at that age, desperate for the chance to make her own choices, to control her own destiny. And she knew what her answer had to be. "I think Daniel Porter is a fine young man," Theresa said, "and I think you should follow your heart, Emma. We trust you to make good decisions. But if he steps out of line even once, I will have words with him," Zachary added, though his smile took the edge off the warning. "You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness always." Emma beamed, and the conversation moved on to other topics, but Theresa found herself blinking back tears. Her eldest daughter was growing up, was beginning her own journey toward independence and love. It was natural and right, and yet it felt impossibly fast, as if no time at all had passed since she was the baby on the train. Later, as she and Zachary prepared for bed, he pulled her into his arms and held her close. "She is going to be fine," he said softly. "We raised her well. She has her head on straight. I know. It just makes me realize how quickly time passes. It feels like yesterday that we were sitting by the fire with her between us, making promises about our future. And we kept those promises. We built exactly the life we wanted, the family we wanted. Emma leaving eventually, that is part of the plan too. That is us succeeding, not failing. When did you become so wise? I married well. It rubbed off." Theresa laughed and let herself be comforted. He was right, of course. This was what they had worked toward, raising children who could make their own way in the world. But that did not make it any less bittersweet. The courtship between Emma and Daniel proceeded with proper decorum. He came to Sunday dinners, where he proved himself able to hold his own in conversation with Zachary about cattle prices and water rights. He brought small gifts for Rose and asked James about his horse training with genuine interest. He treated Theresa with warm respect, calling her madam and thanking her profusely for meals. But most importantly, he looked at Emma as if she were the sun and stars combined, and he listened when she spoke with absolute attention. Theresa watched them together and saw a foundation being built, the same kind that she and Zachary had constructed over years of partnership and mutual regard. In December of 1895, Daniel formally asked for Emma's hand in marriage, and both Emma and her parents agreed. They set the wedding for the following June, giving time for preparations and for the couple to continue learning about each other. The engagement was announced in church, and Maria immediately began planning, descending on the ranch with fabric samples and menu ideas, an enthusiasm that was both exhausting and endearing. The wedding, when it finally arrived, was a beautiful affair. They held it at the ranch, with chairs set up in the yard, and an arch decorated with flowers that Rose had helped Theresa arrange. Emma wore a dress of white lace that had taken months to sew, with a veil that had belonged to Zachary's mother. She was radiant, glowing with happiness as Daniel waited for her at the altar with tears in his eyes. Theresa stood beside Zachary and watched their daughter marry the man she loved, and she felt the weight of years settle on her shoulders. She thought about that train platform in Florence, about the terrified young woman she had been, about the baby she had promised to protect. Emma had grown into everything Theresa had hoped, had become a woman of strength and grace and deep kindness. Her mother, wherever she was, would have been proud. After the ceremony, during the dancing and celebration, Emma pulled Theresa aside for a quiet moment. "Mama," she said, and even now, after all these years, the word made Theresa's heart squeeze. "I want to tell you something before I leave with Daniel. Of course, sweetheart, I know the story. About how you and I came to be together, about my birth mother on the train. Maria told me when I was 12, said I should know the truth. Theresa felt her breath catch. Emma. No, let me finish. I know you were not obligated to keep me, that you chose to. You chose to take responsibility for a baby that was not yours, and then you chose to love me as your own. And Papa, he chose both of us when he had no reason to. Everything I am, everything I have, it is because of the choices you both made. Emma's eyes were bright with tears. I could not have asked for better parents. You are my mama and papa in every way that matters, and I am so grateful every single day that you found me. Theresa was crying now, unable to hold back the tears. She pulled Emma into a fierce embrace, holding her daughter close the way she had that first day on the train platform. You have been my greatest joy, Theresa whispered. From the moment I held you, you have been mine. I have never regretted it, not for a single second. I love you, Mama. I love you too, my darling girl, so very much. They held each other for a long moment before returning to the celebration, and Theresa felt as if something had come full circle. The promise she had made to a dying woman had been kept, and more than kept. Emma had grown up loved and safe and happy, surrounded by family and opportunity. It was everything Theresa could have hoped for. The years continued their steady march forward. Emma and Daniel built a life on their combined properties, and within 2 years, they made Theresa and Zachary grandparents with the arrival of a baby girl they named Grace. James, at 17, was increasingly taking over the day-to-day running of the ranch, showing a business acumen that impressed even the older ranchers in the area. Rose, now 9, had decided she wanted to be a teacher, inspired by the new schoolteacher in Florence who had actually graduated from a teaching college in California. In 1899, as the century drew to a close, Theresa and Zachary celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them, while the children stayed with Maria in town. 16 years, Zachary mused, pouring wine into their glasses. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like we just started. I was thinking the same thing earlier. So much has changed, and yet the important things have stayed the same. Like how much I love you. That has never changed, only gotten deeper. Theresa smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. His hair was starting to show gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had not stopped at that train station? She asked. Sometimes. I think it would have been good enough. The ranch, the land that was always going to be satisfying, but it would not have been complete. It would have been missing the most important parts. You, Emma, James, Rose. You all gave my life meaning beyond just survival and work. You made it worth something. You did the same for us. You saved us, Zachary, truly saved us. No, he said firmly. We saved each other. That is what love is, Theresa. It is two people choosing each other, over and over, through whatever comes. You chose me just as much as I chose you. They talked late into the night, reminiscing about the years behind them and dreaming about the years ahead. They talked about seeing James get married, about more grandchildren, about maybe traveling to see Lucy in Tucson now that the railroad made it easier. They talked about growing old together on the ranch they had built, watching the desert seasons cycle through their familiar patterns. But they also talked about the present, about the joy of simply being together, of having built something lasting and good. They had started with nothing except determination and a leap of faith, and they had created a legacy that would outlast them both. The new century arrived with celebration throughout Arizona. Florence held a New Year's dance that drew people from miles around, and the Nelson family attended in full force. Theresa watched her children dance and laugh, watched Zachary spin Rose around the floor while she giggled with delight, watched Emma waltz with Daniel while they gazed at each other with obvious love. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the twists and turns and unlikely chances that had shaped her life. If Sarah had not gotten on that train, if she had not sat across from Theresa, if she had not fallen ill, none of this would exist. Emma would not be here, and Theresa would not have ended up in Florence, would not have met Zachary, would not have built this beautiful, complicated, joyful life. It was humbling to realize how much depended on chance, on being in the right place at the right moment. But it was also affirming, proof that good things could come from tragedy, that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, appearing at her elbow with a cup of punch. "About how lucky I am. About how one decision, getting on that train, changed everything. Luck had something to do with it, but so did your courage, your willingness to take a risk. You could have stayed in Ohio, could have married that man your aunt wanted. You chose differently, and that choice led you to me. Best choice I ever made." "Second best," Zachary corrected with a smile. "The best was saying yes when I proposed." Theresa laughed and let him pull her onto the dance floor, and they moved together with the ease of long practice. Around them, the celebration continued, the town of Florence marking the start of a new era with hope and optimism. The 1800s had been hard years, full of struggle and growth and change, but they had survived. They had more than survived. They had thrived. The early years of the new century brought their own changes. Arizona was moving steadily toward statehood, with increasing infrastructure and development. The railroad expanded, bringing more goods and people into the territory. Florence grew from a dusty frontier town into a proper community with schools and businesses, and a sense of permanence. The ranch continued to prosper. James officially became a partner with Zachary in 1903, when he turned 21, and together they modernized the operation while maintaining its essential character. They invested in better breeding stock, improved their water systems, and developed relationships with buyers in Phoenix and Tucson that ensured steady income. Emma and Daniel welcomed 2 more children, a boy they named after Zachary and another girl. They visited often, and the cousins grew up playing together, learning the ways of ranch life just as their parents had. Emma had become an accomplished rancher herself, working alongside Daniel to build their own successful operation, and Theresa was immensely proud of the woman her daughter had become. Rose, true to her childhood declaration, went away to teaching college in California when she turned 18. It was the first time any of them had left Arizona, and Theresa cried for days after Rose departed on the train, despite Rose's reassurances that she would be back for holidays and summers. But she understood that children needed to make their own paths, needed to test their wings beyond the safety of home. In 1907, when Theresa was 46 and Zachary 49, they celebrated their 24th wedding anniversary by taking a trip to California to visit Rose. It was strange being away from the ranch for more than a few days, but it was also liberating. They stayed in a hotel in San Francisco, walked along the waterfront, and attended a performance at a real theater. Rose was flourishing in her studies, passionate about education and full of ideas about teaching methods and curriculum. On their last evening in California, they stood on the beach watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, and Zachary pulled Theresa close. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Tying yourself to a simple rancher instead of finding adventure and excitement?" "Never. Not once." Theresa turned in his arms to face him. "You are my adventure, Zachary. You and our family and the life we built." That train platform in Florence, that was the beginning of the greatest adventure I could have imagined. I feel the same way. You made me whole, Theresa. You and Emma, you came into my life and filled spaces I did not even know were empty. They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, and Theresa felt the same flutter she had felt all those years ago by the fireplace. Some things never changed, no matter how much time passed. Love, real love, only deepened with years and shared experiences. When Rose graduated from college in 1909, she returned to Florence and took a position at the growing school there. She boarded with Maria initially, but within a year, she had met and married a young doctor who had recently opened a practice in town. They built a house on the edge of Florence, close enough that Sunday dinners could include the whole family, and before long, Rose was expecting her first child. James married in 1910, choosing a girl from one of the neighboring ranches, a practical young woman named Catherine, who knew cattle and horses as well as any man. They settled into a house on the property that Zachary and James built together, and they quickly had children of their own, adding to the growing Nelson clan. By 1912, Theresa and Zachary were grandparents 7 times over, with an 8th on the way. The ranch that had once seemed so empty was now regularly filled with the sounds of children playing, multiple generations gathering for meals and celebrations. The main house had been expanded twice to accommodate everyone, and there was talk of building yet another addition. Theresa was 51 now, her dark hair liberally streaked with silver, and she had settled into a comfortable middle age. She still managed the household, but Emma and Catherine helped with the larger gatherings, and Maria, now in her 70s but still spry, continued to come by regularly. Zachary, at 54, had handed over most of the physical ranch work to James and the Cowboys, though he still rode out daily to check on things and offer advice. They had reached a stage of life that Theresa had never quite imagined reaching, that place of comfortable security where the hard work of building was done, and they could simply enjoy the fruits of their labor. It was deeply satisfying, seeing her children thriving and her grandchildren growing, knowing that the choices she and Zachary had made had created this legacy. One summer evening, with the whole family gathered for James's 30th birthday, Theresa stood on the porch watching the celebration unfold. Children ran through the yard, chasing each other and laughing. The adults clustered in groups, talking and eating. Zachary was showing one of his grandsons how to rope a fence post, his movements patient and sure. Emma came to stand beside her mother, Grace now a poised 12-year-old trailing behind her. "Big family we have got," Emma observed with a smile. "It is. Sometimes I can barely believe it all started with just you and me on a train platform. Mama, can I ask you something I have always wondered, of course? You ever think about my birth mother, about Sarah?" Theresa considered the question carefully. "I think about her often, actually. I think about how brave she was, trusting a stranger with her most precious possession. I think about what she lost, never getting to see you grow up, never knowing what an amazing woman you became. And I hope, wherever she is, that she knows I kept my promise. That you were loved and safe and given every opportunity to thrive." "I think about her too," Emma admitted. "I wonder what she was like, if I have any of her traits beyond her dark hair. But I also know that you are my mother in every way that matters. You chose me, chose to love me and raise me. That means more than any blood connection ever could. You have made my life richer than I ever dreamed possible. Being your mother has been my greatest honor." They hugged, and Grace joined them, wrapping her arms around both of them in a three-generation embrace. Theresa felt tears prick her eyes again, the happy tears that came more easily with age. She had been given such gifts in her life, gifts she had done nothing to deserve except be willing to accept them. The years continued, bringing the inevitable changes that time always brought. Maria passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1915, surrounded by her large family. The funeral was attended by seemingly everyone in Florence, a testament to how beloved she had been. Theresa mourned her friend deeply, remembering all the help and wisdom Maria had provided over the years. The world was changing rapidly. The Great War raged in Europe, and though it seemed far away from Arizona, it still touched them. Several young men from Florence enlisted and went off to fight. The ranch hands talked about the news constantly, and there was a nervous energy to everyone, a sense that the old ways were ending and something new and uncertain was beginning. Arizona finally achieved statehood in 1912, a moment of celebration throughout the territory. Florence held a parade, and the Nelson family attended, cheering with everyone else for this new chapter in their history. It felt significant, a marking point between past and future. Through it all, Theresa and Zachary remained constants for their family, anchors in an increasingly turbulent world. Their love had not dimmed with time but had matured into something even stronger, a bond forged through decades of partnership and mutual support. They still talked on the porch in the evenings, still held hands when they walked, still found joy in each other's company. In 1920, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. Theresa was 59, Zachary 62, and they had reached a stage where simply waking up together each morning felt like a victory. Their health was generally good, though Zachary's knees complained about the Arizona winters and Theresa's hands were stiff with arthritis. But they were happy, deeply and abidingly happy. They had built a legacy that would outlast them, had raised children who were good people with good values, had created something meaningful with their lives. On that anniversary evening, they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sunset paint the desert in familiar colors. 37 years, Theresa mused. Where did the time go? Into this, Zachary said, gesturing at the ranch, at the house, at the land stretching out before them. Into our children and grandchildren, into every meal shared and every problem solved and every quiet moment together. The time went exactly where it should have. You have any regrets? Anything you wish you had done differently? Not a single thing. Well, maybe I should have kissed you sooner that first night by the fire. I wasted a lot of evenings being proper when I could have been kissing you. Theresa laughed, the sound warm in the cooling air. We made up for it eventually. That we did. Zachary took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin. I want you to know something, Theresa. Everything good in my life came from you. You walked off that train and you brought love and light and purpose with you. I was just existing before, going through the motions. You made me truly live. The feeling is entirely mutual. You saved me, Zachary Nelson. You looked at a desperate woman and a crying baby and you saw something worth protecting. You gave us everything, a home, a family, security, love. You kept the promise you made before you even knew you were making it. We are both mine now, Zachary quoted softly, remembering that day so long ago. That was true then, and it is true now. You and Emma, you were always meant to be mine, and I was always meant to be yours. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear the sounds of James's family preparing for bed. One of the grandchildren was singing, off-key but enthusiastic, and Catherine was laughing at something James said. This was what they had built, Theresa thought. This warmth, this security, this sense of continuity. 3 generations under one roof, connected by love and history and shared purpose. It had started with an act of compassion on a train platform and grown into something magnificent. The future was uncertain, as it always was. The world was changing in ways they could not predict or control. But the foundation they had laid was strong, built on principles that would endure: love, family, hard work, integrity. Their children and grandchildren would face their own challenges, would make their own choices, but they would do so with the security of knowing they were loved and supported. As the night deepened and the desert came alive with its subtle sounds, Theresa leaned her head on Zachary's shoulder and felt profound gratitude. She had come west with nothing and found everything. She had kept a promise to a dying woman and been rewarded beyond measure. She had taken a chance on a stranger at a train station and found the love of her life. The cowboy had said they were both his, the woman and baby nobody wanted. And he had spent the rest of his life proving it, showing through action and devotion that some promises were meant to be kept forever. They had built something beautiful together, something that would endure long after they were gone. And as Theresa sat there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, she knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single moment. Every hardship, every challenge, every tear and triumph had led to this perfect contentment, this deep and abiding peace. They were his and he was theirs, and that was all that mattered, now and always. The end.